Okay, guys, it is 6:02, and I want to get started because I do anticipate a wonderful night of conversation. And so I want to get started. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Common Bonds' communication series. Tonight is particularly special for us for a couple of reasons. Um, Tonight, our conversation, we'll talk about white privilege, and it's special for us for two reasons. The first being that tonight we officially and publicly are changing our name of our series to honor and keep alive the legacy of one of our board members who tragically lost her life this fall. Zoe Rogers was a young African American woman committed to racial equality and inclusion. Zoe's leadership and passion was an inspiration to her peers, to her family, and really to everyone who knew her. So tonight, henceforth, we will rename our speaker series the Zoe Rogers Speaker Series. Again, we want to honor her legacy. We want to keep alive her passion around racial equality for African Americans. And so tonight is special as we dedicate our series to our former board member, Zoe Rogers. Tonight is also special for us because we have young people leading our conversation tonight. And it's special because I appreciate the young people because they bring a pure and honest and forthright approach to their convictions. They unapologetically get straight to the heart of matters without any pretense. And so that's why I love when our young people lead. There is there's a Bible verse. Um, it's Isaiah 11:6, and it talks about, it's a picture of what heaven is going to be like, the peacefulness of it. And it talks about how the lion will be able to lay down with the lamb. And then it says, and the children shall lead them. And tonight we know that our speakers aren't children, but they are young men, and they're closer to that age bracket than I am. But their approach is closer to childlike. It's honest and it's direct. And so tonight, the young people will lead us. Tonight we have, as our speakers, we have Jason Dumas. Jason is a native of Haverford, Pennsylvania. That's a suburb just outside of Philadelphia. Growing up, Jason had a unique perspective when it came to racial inequality. The majority of his family lived in the inner city neighborhoods of Philadelphia, and Jason ended up spending much of his time there with his family. He was well aware of the differences between his neighborhood and those of his aunts, uncles, and cousins. Jason attended Malvern Prep, a private Catholic school in Malvern, PA. After graduating, he went to and graduated from Syracuse University. Jason majored in broadcast and digital journalism with dreams to becoming a television sports anchor. After graduating, he spent that journey, he began that journey, and he worked as a production assistant at ESPN a sports anchor reporter in Bismarck, North Dakota, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and Hagerstown, Maryland. He is currently in the sports director at Cron 4 News in San Francisco, California. He's also a Common Bonds board member. When he's not working, he enjoys cheering for his favorite sports teams, spending time with his family and friends, and traveling. To join Jason in conversation is Tim Israel. Tim grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia. His community-first approach to life was instilled at a young age, influenced by his large family and their years developing Quaker values at Abington Friends School. Tim graduated from Wesleyan University in 2016 with a bachelor's degree in economics, while also minoring in creative writing. Tim is passionate about youth sports and education. He spent over 3 years in Portland, Oregon, working in higher education consulting, where he helped institutions across the country develop strategic plans to combat current challenges with budgeting and transitioning to online education. During quarantine, he brought his technical skills to the virtual classroom, and he taught 5th and 7th grade math. He also coached a Philadelphia-based AAU team for multiple years and spent time teaching tennis. In June, along with his sister Emily, Tim began engaging the Philadelphia suburbs in conversation about race. Tim and his sister started holding signs for a couple of hours a day, encouraging people to talk. They have talked to hundreds of people about the current state of our country, gaining perspective to understand how we can become a more just, equal, and unified country. So today, we have here to moderate this discussion between Jason and Tim, an ally that I had the honor to know for over 20 years. Mike DeCandido, co-founder and board chair of Common Bonds, encompasses the attributes of a true servant leader. He's a servant in terms of his humility and his willingness to help. He's also a leader. He's skilled and knowledgeable and experienced in business, but also in interpersonal skills. He understands and values people. So without further ado, I'll turn the discussion over to my friend and coworker and co-founder, Mike DeCandido.
Thank you, April, for the wonderful introductions, and thank you everybody for attending. One thing I want to mention to you, before we jump in, is on your screen in the upper right-hand corner, you should see a chat window. One of the things that it's a little box with 3 bars in it, and if you put it on, it'll say chat with everybody. And that's the way that we're going to solicit questions from you. So as we're going along, so we can keep the flow going, but certainly make sure that we're getting everybody's questions. I'm going to type in right now questions so you can see it on the right-hand side. Please ask your questions, and we will embed them through the whole event that we're having this evening. In order to practice this, I'd like to throw a question out to you guys and ask you to give a one-word answer or a short couple of word answer to this question. When you hear the word privilege, what do you think of? When you hear the word privilege, what do you think of? So if you could use the chat window, just put in a word or two that says, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word privilege? Let's take about 30 seconds for folks to answer that, and then we'll jump in. It'll set a good foundation for the conversation. Outstanding. guys are a wonderful audience so far. So really what we wanted to do is really articulate, and you can see many of the answers that are coming in, advantage, superiority, worthy, fairness, unfairness, health, safety, elite, those types of things. Tonight, we're specifically focusing on privilege based on the color of your skin and the topic of white privilege. And I'm thrilled to have Jason and Tim with us to share some of the experiences related to white privilege that they have had, and help us understand what it is, and most importantly, when we have these sessions, on how to address it. So thank you for putting your views, and I'll jump in with some of the questions that I want to ask them, and we'll start the dialogue. So April did a nice bio on each of you, but what I'd like to know a little bit more of, and I think the audience would as well, is a little bit more about your backgrounds, and would love to hear a little bit about your upbringings, and in particular, when you realized, Tim, you had, and Jason, you didn't have privilege based on the color of your skin. So Tim, why don't you start with that question, if you don't mind?
Absolutely. Yeah, I just want to start by saying thanks for having me and let me join. I've really enjoyed every conversation I've been to over the last couple of months. Common Bonds is doing awesome work. Something that I think is really important for us as a country right now is promoting healthy discussion. And that's exactly what we do here a couple times a month, and I think that's extremely valuable. As April mentioned in my bio, I grew up in Philly suburbs. I went to Quaker school. Quakerism is rooted in kind of community, and seeing the good in people, seeing the light in people is a phrase that is often said and believed. And with that, I think I have instilled values in me that are about just connecting with people and creating communities, and that's really where I come from, and coming from like a big family that has instilled that in my values as well. I didn't grow up in a very diverse area per se, the exact suburb that I lived in, but Philadelphia is definitely a very diverse city, and I've been able to interact with a lot of different types of people in my life through playing a lot of sports growing up, and also going to a smaller school that had kids from all over the city. In terms of when I recognized my privilege, I would say probably sometime in high school, maybe 10th grade, something like that. I don't know if there was an exact moment, because I think for me, understanding kind of white privilege was more about understanding myself, and understanding who I am in regards to the rest of the society. And that is a long process, because it doesn't have to do exactly with a moment in time. You know, there's not that many moments in my life, to be honest, where I've recognized that I'm white in that moment. And I think that's the exact definition of white privilege. If you ask me, you ask other white people from conversations I've had, you know, there are not a lot of times where we notice our skin color, versus conversations I've had with my Black friends and acquaintances. Like, there is always a specific time. It's always a younger age. It's an exact experience, or it's every single day. And that's like the definition of white privilege. One thing I want to just mention at the beginning here is that I think white privilege encapsulates all of the things that were stated in the chat. And I'm going to kind of refer to this a lot, I think, today, is that we need to remember that it's more than just one thing. It has to do with skin color, but it really captures education. It captures wealth. It captures healthcare. It captures all of these, all of the other things, safety. And that is something I'm going to mention a lot, because it's really understanding the history of our country, and all of those things kind of molded together that are impacted by race.
So that's great, and it is a wonderful point. And I think the reason why we wanted to ask the question up front was, all of these things are embedded in systematic and institutional racism, and white privilege has driven a lot of these things from policy decisions and historical things and so on. So Tim, appreciate that. So Jason, we mentioned, or April mentioned in your bio, the fact you grew up in Haverford, you went to Malvern Prep, but you also had many of your relatives who grew up in West Philly. So would love to get your perspective of kind of your upbringing. And as Tim mentioned, for a white person, it really isn't a moment in time, but for a lot of African Americans, it is. There's an event that happens. Can you share with the audience? Is it a specific event that happened, or is it a moment in time, or is it over a course of time when you realized that you had disadvantages because of the color of your skin?
Yeah, Mike. So I feel like I'm in such a unique place because of just for a fact that I grew up in a primarily white space, where, I was pretty much the only Black kid or one of a few when it came to just my neighborhood or going to school, or even, the extracurriculars like the local sports teams and whatnot that I would participate in growing up. But then I also, at the same time, I also spent a lot of time with my immediate family, who all grew up in the inner cities. We know, Philadelphia public school system lacks a lot of resources. Neighborhoods are underfunded. So on one part of me, I felt, like an outsider, but at the same time, I also felt blessed because I knew I had opportunities that, just my immediate family would not have access to. So I was never I never wanted to act like I was at too much of a disadvantage because I was so close to people who had it way worse than I did in terms of just, opportunity and access to resources. But I guess for me personally, growing up where I did, it wasn't really this one moment. I guess it just started when a bunch of different things started happening. And then it made me realize, okay, I'm different, and people look at me a little different. Like when you're like a third, fourth grader, just out of play yard, you're not really, you're young, naive. You have so much innocence. Everyone has innocence when they're born. So you're not thinking that way. So I'm sure a lot of things have happened and people have looked at me and I didn't even realize it. But then, little subtle things start happening. You start hearing things and like, people probably don't even realize this is an insult, but you start hearing people say things like, you speak so well. And I'm like, well, I speak just like my friend over here and like him. Like, what do you mean I speak so well? Then you start to realize what they mean is like, wow, I'm not expecting you to speak the way you do because you're Black. That's all it is. And at the time, you don't really notice it, but over time, once those compliments start coming in more and more, you start to realize it. So those are just little things that you start to notice. And then even as you start growing up, and you even get to ages where you're still young, but you're starting to find yourself, you start realizing that, places like bars and restaurants, they have these very detailed, specific dress codes. And you're like, okay, that's a lot of stuff that I wear and my cousin wears and my friends wear. So we can't get in the bar because we're wearing this, and you'll literally get turned away from a bar. That has happened to me. I can't count how many times it happens. Over time, you start to kind of learn what to wear. I never like to, completely go away from my identity. So I'll fight it, or I'll do this, or I'll find a loophole. But it's like, okay, I can't wear this. Like, I can't wear this hat the way I wear it. But you can wear a hat. You can wear a cowboy hat in there. I can't wear Timberland boots in there, but I see this dude with like these dirty cowboy boots that he's been tracking through the mud with. I have these $200 boots on without a scuff on them. You're not letting me in because they're Timbs. It's not a coincidence, So it's little things like that. I remember. I mean, this is something I didn't even remember it until recently when we had this conversation last week, our pre-conversation, Mike and Tim, when you're thinking, when's the first time like you learned you were different? Remember, I can't remember, seventh, eighth grade. And, you know, back then, it's like, it's all innocent. So like, I asked out this girl to like a dance. It was like a middle school dance or something, a formal. It was before I got to high school. I just remember that. So either sixth, seventh, eighth grade. And we went to the dance and, you know, we're like, okay, so like, are you going to be my girlfriend? I'll be your boyfriend. Boom. You know, that's how it went back then. And when you're that age, like I said, so innocent and naive. And we dated for like 2 weeks. That's probably like an eternity in that time frame. And when you're that age, but I remember she broke up with me or whatever. And, you know, I didn't take it hard or anything. Like I said, it was never that serious, but it came back around. Like one of my friends was like, Jay, like she broke up with you because her parents said she can't date a black dude. And we were like 12, you know? It wasn't like we were like out painting the town. We talked on AIM, you know, that was the extent of our relationship. But that was another time when I realized I was different. Right. And it's just like there was never that monumental incident. I never really had that until maybe I got a little older when I started dealing with police officers, but it was never something huge that was impactful, but it was just these little microaggressions, little instances that really just like sliced a little piece of your dignity. And once you started to realizing it, like almost dehumanizes you. And from outside looking in, or if it happens every now and then, someone who it doesn't happen to can be like, all right, but it's not a huge deal. But over time, it's like you keep getting like slapped with a rubber band, or, you know, like pricked with a needle. It's just over time, it really starts to eat at you. And sometimes you just want to snap. You know, everybody has different levels of patience, deals with things a different way. But, you know, some people, it hurts more than others. And then it's just like, you know, things, and excuse me for random, I'm just trying to put all of my thoughts into one coherent, you know, sequence, but it's things like when you walk past someone's car and you notice them, they lock the door. Or I've had a couple instances, even now, where not so much lately, but when I first moved to San Francisco, I would Uber a lot. And I would literally have an Uber driver see me and pull off. And I don't think things like that are coincidences. Maybe if it happened once, but it's little things like that. And it can become really infuriating and frustrating, especially if people don't acknowledge that they exist, or they come up with an excuse, or like, oh, well, he can let whoever he wants in his car, or someone about a bar owner, they can have whatever rules they want. We know anyone can have whatever rules they want. That's not the point. That's not the argument. But we know how those rules are based on. We know it. We need to acknowledge it, call people out for it, whatever, you know, needs to be done. And so, you know, it's just things like that, you know, just little moments where you started to realize you go from just like a young, innocent kid hanging out in your neighborhood, and then you become jaded after a couple of years. Once you get a little older and can contextualize things, you're like, all right, I know I'm different. And I know I'm not looked at like everyone else is looked at.
Yeah. That's great. And I think, you know, you brought up one main point, and Nikki put it in the chat as well. You brought up a lot of microaggressions. And as many of you have been following us over the course of the last couple of months with Common Bonds, our topic in November was interpersonal racism, and in particular microaggressions. And I want to get to that in a little bit to talk about how, from both of your perspectives, you know, how do we deal with folks who display those microaggressions? But before I do that, you know, one of the things I want to also build on, Jason, that you mentioned, you made a comment in there about fighting it.
Yeah.
And I think what really, and April brought it up at the beginning of the conversation, what's really admirable about both you and Tim, and why we wanted to have you on, is that you're leaders. You know, you understand racism occurring against African Americans, and you've taken the lead in addressing those things. So tell us what drives you to be a leader. Tell us what really motivates you to be to lead in educating folks and making sure, particularly with the younger generation, millennial Gen Z population, the importance of leading, being not only an ally but leading in regards to driving these type of changes in our society. Jason, I'd love to hear you and kind of address that question if you don't mind.
Yeah. I guess, well, one, I just felt like, and I kind of described it in my first answer, I feel like I have a really unique position, being that I'm a Black kid who grew up in a white space, but I also spent so much time with my family who were in their own realities. So I feel like I have such a unique vantage point, where, I could grow up and go to things like bar mitzvahs and college graduation parties at mansions and see this life that is just so crazy. And to a lot of people, that's just normal. That's just upbringing. And then I can go be with my cousins all week and just see their realities. So, and once I started growing up and, you get to college and then you get to the real world, and it all starts to come together when you start getting real life experience. Like, you're just a kid, when you're coming up to 18, that's not on your mind. You're trying to get into college, trying to have your fun, this, that. But once you graduate and you're in the real world and you're carving your own path through society, with all my experiences and things that I've been able to witness and see from my scope, I just, it wasn't just like some split decision. It just naturally happened. Me felt the need to say, hey, this isn't right. That isn't right. Call this person out on that. I'm getting these opportunities. I see other people don't get those opportunities. They work just as hard as me. Like, one misconception is, a lot of people in this country think wealth equals hard work. It's like, okay, all these people have so much money and so much opportunity because they worked hard. And yeah, hard work gets you a lot of places, but I know a lot of people who work really, really hard who are just stuck. Janitors work just as hard as CEOs. They might have had just a different course of action, or different path to get to where they are. So hard work doesn't equal success all the time. Yeah. So it just kind of naturally happened to me because I think my experiences, and then, as I kept going, I know I have a platform just with the job I have, and people, naturally look up to me and look to me with certain things. So it just came, and then you blink and now I'm here on a Zoom call with all of you guys. It was not planned. It wasn't a goal of mine. It just kind of naturally happened. And I just have to thank my experiences for that because, like I said, all in 1 week, I could be down the beach, Avalon, New Jersey, just like affluence everywhere, which is fine. I have friends, I have people who are darn near family who spend time down there, but I can be down there for a week and then I can go home to, back home and visit my cousin who's like, you know what, they're, I have to help their kids with their schoolwork because, they're not prepared for anything. And it's crazy. In one instance, I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent. This hit me. I'll never forget this. I was in 9th grade and my cousin was a freshman at Bloomsburg University. And he went to Martin Luther King High School. It's in like the Alany, Germantown section of Philadelphia. He was always a solid student, B's and A's, pretty good. And, he was always really driven. He still is. He really had his mindset on going to college, which was great because that's not always an option for people at that school. I think only probably 35% of the kids there go to college. But he went to college, and I'm a ninth grader, and he's a freshman in college. He used to call me to help him with his work. He couldn't do it. And this is a guy who was focused and determined. He went through 4 years of the Philadelphia public school system, got to college, and it was like he was reading another language. Here I am, only a ninth grader, 13 years old. He's like 18, 19. And I'm helping him with his work. And I'm like, what's going on here? You know what I mean? He couldn't prepare him for his freshman year of college. Here I am, a 13-year-old doing his college level work. Some of the work I didn't even know how to do. I'm like, well, why doesn't he know how to do it? And at the time, I probably thought that, but you look back and you're like, he wasn't prepared, and that's not his fault, you know? And so it's just stuff like that. And, you know, experiences like that, you start to realize that, one, I realized how lucky I was just because of where I grew up and the access of opportunities and what my parents could do for me. But then at the same time, I still realized I was an outsider when it came to many things, because I was like the token black guy, you know, of the community of that world. So it just gave me a unique perspective on a lot of things, and naturally it gave me a voice that I wanted to, you know, speak on.
Yeah. And thanks for sharing. And I think you brought up a key word that also came up a lot in the chat, which was opportunity. And you know, I think, again, that's the education that we're looking to give a lot of people, that there are a lot of people that work hard, but the starting line isn't the same. And the obstacles from where the starting line is to where you have to get to are considerably harder. And I think your example of your cousin going through the Philly school district and coming out of there is a wonderful example of where the challenges we have where inequities in education are, particularly within our inner cities. So I really appreciate you sharing it and giving that perspective. Tim, I want to get your perspective as well from a leadership, and in particular, April mentioned at the beginning some of the work you did, and I see your sister Emily is here listening, and appreciate her joining us. But you in particular, you know, had a really unique leadership moment over this summer, and would love you to tell the group about it. You know, kind of what drives you, what drives you to be a leader, what drove you to do some of the things you did this summer, and some of the feedback you got doing it.
Yeah. I think part of you spoke to the word opportunity, Jason, and Mike, and I think a lot of why I was driven to you know, get involved and I want to be a leader is that I have had a lot of opportunity. And we speak about the word privilege. I have lots of privileges, and I know that. And I think a lot of people associate privilege with a negative connotation, and it's but if you can use it to impact others' days positively, I've been given tools and resources to be able to help others too, and I kind of thoroughly believe that, and that's why I want to make a difference and help anyone who I can, because I just want to positively impact someone else's day, and that's a goal of mine every day. This summer, basically, after once the protesting really ramped up, my sister and I were living at my mom's house in the suburbs of Philadelphia, and we didn't really want to go downtown into the city to be at the protests during COVID with you know, millions of people, but we really didn't like sitting there. We didn't like sitting at home while it was all happening, and we're like, what are we gonna do? And we started talking, and we realized the suburbs, there were things happening, but they'd be very organized at this time on a Saturday. And so suburban communities were not forced to engage with this topic of race that was very present in the country. And we wanted to create a presence and force people to engage with it. And so we started holding signs that Black Lives Matter, here for discussion. The two of us would just go out, started at 2 hours a day, got up to 9 on given days. And really we're just standing there. We were trying to have people come over and talk to us, whether whoever it was, whether that was a Black individual that came over just to say thank you, and just wanted to connect and have a nice, healthy conversation, or it was someone that comes over and is really curious, what are the reactions, or someone that really hated Black Lives Matter, and wanted to yell at us, and be angry, and really have a, once you get into it, you start realizing there's just a misunderstanding, that we all kind of have different knowledge points, and we all had different experiences, and we all have our own stories, that lead us to kind of where we are today and what we believe today. And what was so fascinating about doing this, and like April said, I talked to hundreds and hundreds, I don't know, maybe thousands, 1,000 people, and we live in a world today that the initial reaction was binary. It was most of the time either I love this or I hate this, and through conversation, there's this I started to find this understanding with my sister that it's not that most people really do just want to live in an equal world when they talk about it, but they just don't see everything. They don't have the same perspective. They don't have the same vision to certain things because of what they're surrounded by. And for example, I'm talking to an ex-cop, and this guy is really pissed off that I'm holding a Black Lives Matter sign, doesn't understand Black Lives Matter, and we ended up talking for an hour. And he continually said that there was not, like racism didn't exist anymore. But then at the very end of the conversation, he looked me in the eye and said to me that our education system fails minorities. And I honestly, that's where I stopped the conversation. I said, listen, we've been talking for an hour, but I want you to think about what you just said, because you keep telling me this blanket statement about why you don't like Black Lives Matter, basically, but you just said something that it's fighting for. And you just spoke to what this fight is about. Exactly that. That is institutional. That's exactly what you just said. And I think that's just a good example of what kind of conversations I was able to have this summer with my sister. And actually, I think Dr. Q's on here. Hey, Dr. Q, someone that I met would come by all the time. Just we build a friendship, and just from being out there and talking about what was going on in the world.
That's wonderful, and it's a great tribute to your leadership and your recognition of having people dialogue. And I kind of want to build on that a little bit with both of you, and then I'll get to a couple of the questions that are in the chat. But both of you have talked about the environments that you grew up in, and Jason, you growing up in an environment that was predominantly a white environment, your immediate environment, and then Tim, you obviously talking about your experiences over the summer. And one of the challenges we have, and we're addressing it with Common Bonds as a whole, is this sensitivity and almost fear of discussing race, and the fact that when conversations come up that are race natured or race focused, many people go silent. They become defensive, as you mentioned. When you bring up white privilege, the first reaction from a lot of white people is, I didn't grow up with money, I didn't grow up in class system, etc. How have you guys become comfortable in discussing race, not only with your family, but with folks from a different race? Because one of the things we really want to do is collaboratively talk about these topics, and collaboratively drive to solutions and actions that can help drive out racism and inequity. So Tim, from your perspective, as you, as you were going through this over the summer and talking to many different people, plus all the other things that you've done, what is some advisement that you can give the group about, what's the best way to discuss race so people don't go silent? And not only with folks that are the same race as you, but who are a different race from you as well.
Yeah. I think to start, like the fact of the matter is, I think comfort is a tough word. And race is a very emotional topic in the country right now. And it will be for a while. And I think part of being able to participate in the conversation is actually acknowledging that the reason maybe you're not doing it is because it's uncomfortable. And so it's going to be uncomfortable. This summer, my sister and I went and stood out there with signs. It was just us two on the corner of a suburban, right outside a grocery store. And the first 3 days were uncomfortable. The first couple conversations, I've had a lot of conversations about race in my life before that, but doing it in this new way and engaging with random strangers, it was uncomfortable. It's a very emotional topic. Any emotional topic is going to be a little bit uncomfortable. But I think the first step is really discuss it. Like, you just have to do it. If it's something you're a little scared of, I think to get over any fear or any discomfort, you need to attack it head on. That's my philosophy. I used to be really afraid of heights. I'm starting to get over that now. I've done a lot of hiking now in the last couple of years living on the West Coast, and I feel a lot better about it. I don't think it's that much different than that. Is the more conversations you have about race, the more comfortable or the more perspectives and stories that you're able to acquire and gain. But I think kind of two pieces of advice are, I think one, you have to understand yourself. You have to know your own story, how you fit into society. You need to really understand going into the conversation where your place in the conversation is based off who you're talking to. And then on the flip side, you need to come into the conversation from a place of learning about someone else, that you're gaining their perspective. You need to build trust. You need to build that relationship with that person, whether it's someone you know really well or not. You need to be vulnerable and listen, because once you can connect with someone, that's when we can start talking about potential change or potential gaining of perspective in that other person and maybe pushing them down a different path. If we're not connecting with people, we're not going to see any changes. If you push change, a lot of people get into defensive mode. So rather than push change, maybe we need to think about it as more of a, learning and gaining perspective and doing something a little bit different than, we need to change this, change your mind. That's a really hard thing to do.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice. That's great advice. Jason, would love to get your perspective. And Jason, the other thing I'd love to get your perspective on in this question of addressing, how to discuss race is you talked a lot about microaggressions. And how do you address a microaggression? How do you address whether you as an African American hear a microaggression from somebody? How do you address that? But also, how can I as a white person address a microaggression I may hear negatively about an African American person, in a way that is conversational and that can be, as Tim mentioned, and as we're really striving for within Common Bonds, educational.
Well, first of all, I'm getting a lot out of this conversation myself, and I'm so fortunate we have Tim on, because hearing some of the things he said and how understanding he is and patience, I know I need to work on that, because, sometimes I get to a point where it's like, I'm like, I don't want to have this back and forth with you. Like, if you don't get it by now, like, we're done and get out my face, and when it, and I know that's not how you progress all the time, as satisfying sometimes as it just to be like, you're an idiot and just like walk away. That doesn't do anything if we're trying to make true progress. So sometimes I have to either swallow my pride, bite the bullet, listen to 2 3 minutes of complete ignorance that is like, mind numbing and you want to like bang your head against a wall. But sometimes you just have to do it to make progress. When it comes to microaggressions and things of that nature, it kind of all depends. I take it on a case by case basis. If it's something that I think stems from like innocence or it was well intentioned, like for instance, you speak so well. That's very, very, very ignorant. But if I think, wow, this woman or man meant to compliment me genuinely, she wasn't trying to offend me, I'll be like, yo, I just gotta let you know that's not a compliment. Uh, I I speak just like everyone else. I'm not Barack Obama up here, speaking so eloquently, like where it is crazy. I'm speaking pretty normally. You're just kind of surprised that I'm speaking this way because the color of my skin, and I guess most of the people you see on TV or portrayed in movies or however your concept of black people is doesn't match mine. So I will explain that to them. But if I think it is a microaggression out of ignorance, I'll be aggressive right back with them. I'll be like, yo, that's not cool. You know what I mean? And that style might not be for everyone, you know. So I'm not telling you if you hear someone say something racist, like, oh, a-hole, you don't have to do that.
Mhm.
But, it's just sometimes you really do have to be aggressive to nip it in the bud. You really do. I'm sure April can attest to this and other people in the chat. Like sometimes you have to fight like a microaggression with aggression yourself so people get the point. Because sometimes if you kind of sidestep around it or be a little timid and are so worried about protecting their feelings, they won't get it. Now, if they realize, yo, you offended me, if you like, I have a story and he's not on here and I wish I did. I wish he was on, he couldn't. One of my friends, he's a white ally. Most of his friends growing up were all black kids. He was a D1 basketball player, so he was also just naturally around black kids his whole life. And he was just telling me this story. We were just talking about everything that had been going on. And he was like, yeah, Jay, I was at a bar and I was with like a bunch of my friends as white guys, and we met this black guy. We were all like talking at the bar, and the black guy had cornrows. And my friends kept telling him that he looked like Kawhi Leonard because Kawhi Leonard also has cornrows. But he was like, Jay, he looked nothing like Kawhi Leonard. They weren't even this. Kawhi Leonard's like dark skin like me. This was like a light skinned black guy. He kept saying he looked like Kawhi Leonard. And finally, I kind of brought him aside and I really like got into him. I was like, yo, you can't be saying stuff like that. What are you doing? And he was like, they were almost mad at me. Like, what are you talking about? We're not racist. And my friend was like, yo, I'm being like this because that can get you punched in your face.
Mhm.
And it wasn't like he was advocating for violence, but that is just a reality. So I say that story to say sometimes you do have to be a little more abrasive when you tell somebody because that's true. Like they could have told the wrong person, kept telling him you look like Kawhi Leonard. He doesn't. He just has cornrows. Like no one would say every blonde dude with hair just like Tim looks alike. But you get that stereotype. All black people look alike. Everybody with cornrows looks alike. And my friend had to lay down the law. He was like, stop saying that. And especially if you do that, do not do that around me. Because that looks bad on me too. You guys are with me. You keep telling this guy he looks like Kawhi Leonard. He clearly seemed a little agitated by it the first couple of times. Cut it out. So sometimes there are times where you have to be a little forward. And, all those situations are unique. So like if you're dealing with, you can probably be a little more forward with your mom and dad if something like that happens with them than maybe a coworker, for example. You know the situation, but I don't think you should be afraid not to be a little direct with people, because, you know, sometimes you shouldn't have to worry about hurting someone's feelings. You just have to be direct. Sometimes you should take another course of actions. Like I said, if you can tell this is just this sweet woman who did not mean to offend me. She probably feels so bad already when I bring it up. You just have to use your instinct, but it can be polar opposites, your reaction to given the situation. And I know sometimes I should tone it back a little because I'm whatever the opposite of passive aggressive is me. And sometimes that can be a little off-putting to people. Sometimes that can stunt the progress of a conversation. So I get that too. And that's why I said I'm grateful hearing Tim speak. But, you know, my reactions sometimes can be all over the place.
Yeah. Well, the passion around it is admirable. And, you know, I think one other thing which you said that I jump on is that reaction needs to be from everybody. So as a white ally and an anti-racist, you know, if you hear those feedbacks as a white person, you need to have a similar reaction as an African American person. It's not up to the only African Americans to give that feedback. So as whites, you know, one of the things that I've learned and continue to learn is that when I hear those comments, I have to be an ally and speak up as well. And I think, Jason, your advice as to understanding the situation and the environment and the intent certainly will drive, you know, how do you respond to that? So great. So thank you. So I want to get to a question that's on here. One of the things I mentioned about the chat and would ask you guys to really continue doing this is the chat isn't only for questions, but feedback and advisement that people are giving. And that's wonderful. So really follow along with the chat and you can see how many people are talking about, you know, different resources, different things that they've heard from people reinforcing the messages that Tim and Jason are giving us. And that's wonderful. That's part of our sharing experience and not only hearing from the speakers, but hearing others' experience. And that is greatly appreciated. I want to hit on a question from Hank, and I see Hank there with his daughter and appreciate, Hank, you joining and you having your daughter come with you. And I think this question builds, and Jason, I'll start with you on another topic we talked about, and you mentioned was perceptions, you know, social pressure and perceptions that we have. So Hank asked the question, as a dad to two middle-aged children, the concept of being a leader and speaking out is directly counter to the natural instinct to fit in and be part of the group. Any thoughts on how to combat this instinct and help create activists at an early age? And then on top of that, and maybe both of you can answer this already, and Jason in particular, you being in media, is kind of how does the media, how does our choice of media outlets, the people we relate to, the media we look at, drive our perceptions, and how do we change that? How do we open people up to look at broader perceptions? So I'll start with Hank's question first about, you know, kind of the social pressures of being a young teenager, and you know, what are advisements that you guys can give, you know, from your growing up that can, you know, certainly have Hank's children feel comfortable with addressing these things, but also address them and being leaders and being activists in supporting it.
Great question, Hank. So I guess there's a couple of things. You know, I know growing up as, you know, you're young, you're easily influenced. You just, you know, you don't want to stick out like a sore thumb. Those are natural feelings for an adolescent. You know, we've all been there. You know, we all want to be accepted. We all want to be cool, whatever the adjective is. But one thing I've always felt was important: always stick to your gut. If something feels wrong, you know, go with your gut. It probably is wrong. It's probably immoral, whatever you want to call it. Always go with your gut, even if that means you standing out and be like, you know what, this isn't cool. Or you know what, we're bullying that kid. Or you know what, that's not cool. And this is one thing, you know, this is probably tougher to get through to kids and adolescents now. It's tougher than it sounds because I was a kid and an adolescent once, but listen to your parents. Your parents are usually right, and they usually want the best for you. Now, I'm not saying everyone's parents are right on every single thing because we all are ignorant about certain things, but, you know, for instance, Hank is in here. You know, he clearly is a well-intentioned person who has a lot of care for this society and the progress of this society. So, but listen to him. And, you know, he's not going to steer you wrong. And, you know, there were times, you know how many times now that I'm 31 years old and I've just over the last 5 years, I've told myself, wow, my mom was right. Or wow, my dad was so right. And you're young and you know everything, and you know, you think you're invincible, and then you grow up and life humbles you, and you start realizing, oh yeah, that thing that pops told me, he was right. Let me start listening now. So, you know, it sounds so cliche, but trust your gut. You know, most people, you want to give them the benefit of the doubt. Most people have a good moral compass. Sometimes they ignore it because they don't want to stand out, or they succumb to public pressure. But try to block that out and listen to your moral compass, and then, you know, listen to your parents or people that you trust have well intention. Listen to them, and you'll usually be okay.
I got a couple as well. Building off that is, I think, two things is like exposing kids to leaders, and exposing them to people that are talking the way that you want to raise your kids, and help them become the people that you want them to become, and especially, you know, if it helps with empowerment, seeing someone else that's willing to say something might encourage a kid to say something. And the other one is learning how to communicate effectively. I'm very passionate about education. I think our education system does not focus on communication, and I think communication is the most important tool to creating more unified world. And we do it all the time. We're talking right now, but we don't know how to actually communicate effectively, most of us, in ways that are healthy a lot of the time. And I think we need to focus on that at a younger age, and communicate and learn how to debate and combat issues, and confront challenges and speak up when something's wrong. And that's all focusing on a certain type of communication.
That's great. That's great advisement. So thank you both. And hopefully, Hank, that was helpful.
And just one more thing to add. I'm sorry cutting you off, because I also saw another question that kind of ties into the question that Hank asked. It was Grant Lotus. He's, you know, actually a coworker of mine, so I can speak to him later. But he just said, you know, what advice do you have for a parent who's raising two young white kids, 6 and 4, in a painfully white suburb that thinks it's progressive and woke, but when you look around, it's almost uncomfortable? And I think, Hank, you can take this advice too. Just when it comes to, you know, raising, you know, leaders and people who won't strain the pack. You just moving around the country my whole life, you know, one thing that I noticed was always a common denominator for people who weren't ignorant were people with diverse upbringing. Now, you know, if you live in a neighborhood that's all white, that's how it is. No one's saying go move somewhere else and uproot your life. But put them in extracurricular activities where you see other people of color and boys and girls, or, you know, have them do this activity, you know, hey, maybe take them out of your school district to go play on a soccer team in the other district that has a little more diversity. Because I've noticed every kid, like my friend who told those kids to shut up at the bar, he grew up around people of color. He grew up in a white suburb in Westchester, Pennsylvania, but he was playing sports with kids of color, doing other activities with kids of color. The most respectful and knowledgeable, I can't think of the opposite word of ignorant, the antonym of ignorant right now, but whatever that word is, the people who had that all had diverse upbringings, and they didn't meet their first black person when they were 19 years old in their freshman dorm. You know, they didn't go to college and be like, wow, I never knew a Jewish kid. You know what I mean? They were exposed to people of different upbringings, different beliefs, different religions, nationalities, and they naturally took to that because they were exposed to so much. So they didn't grow up ignorant. And then when, you know, so when they turn on MTV and, you know, all you see is the black drug dealer, they didn't think, well, you know, most black people are drug dealers. That's why they have their issues. You know what I mean? It just is natural when you're exposed to a lot of different communities and walks of life as a young age, because kids are sponges.
That's great. That's great. A great advisement, and also again, great advisement from people in the chat as well who are parents and you know, have gone through the experiences. And that's again one of the things that we pride ourselves here at Common Bonds is sharing personal experiences. So you want to throw a little parenting in there to help with it? That's wonderful as well. So that's great. Thank you. Hey, I have two more questions. One, I want to go back to kind of the beginning, and Pamela has a question here. And you know, we talked about both of you growing up in comfortable socioeconomic environments or economic environments. And so Pam's question is, does class and socioeconomic status play a larger part in the privilege conversations? Either one of you can jump in and address that.
I'd say absolutely. Am I good to go, Jason?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, cool. I would say absolutely. I think class and socioeconomic status plays a larger part in privilege conversations. And when we talk about white privilege, it is a part of that discussion. I'm talking to Jason last week. I know he's passionate about kind of thinking about how we teach the history of the country in our schools. And I think that tells the story of how race and class and socioeconomic status is all kind of wrapped together. They're not separate conversations. You know, if we look at them separately, we're missing a lot of the story. And therefore, I think we need to be talking about them together because, like I mentioned at the beginning, that white privilege wraps into every type of privilege that we mentioned at the beginning, that everyone wrote in the chat. And so I think it absolutely is a part of the conversation.
Yeah, you know, you can't really separate. Well, I think one misconception is that when you speak on white privilege, people who didn't grow up, whether white people who didn't grow up with financial privilege, they get very, very shut off. They're like, well, you know what? I didn't have a pot to piss in where I grew up. I'm not privileged, this, that, and the third. And I think we need to let people know that white privilege isn't just financial gains. You know, being white privilege is, you know what, your skin color has never impeded your progress. It never has, well, he's white, so my life has been harder. Where for a lot of black people, you know, even if they made it, I always see people think LeBron James, like, nobody can be racist towards LeBron James because he's rich and powerful. But it's not true. It doesn't matter whether you're as rich and accomplished as LeBron James, or if you're someone sitting in, you know, a row house in West Philly right now. There will always be hurdles that we have to get over because of the color of our skin. A lot of black people are taught and told, and this is not something that, you know, black parents like aspire to tell their kids. It probably pains them. I'll probably tell my kids this one day too. You're going to have to work twice as hard and overcome things that your white friends just won't have to. It doesn't matter how much money we have. It doesn't matter where we live. There are certain things, and you have to realize that. And it might not be fair, but it's your reality. Black parents have those conversations with their kids. And sometimes it's just like, you know, when I hear people fighting back on it, and it's like, yo, do you think this whole collection of people are crazy and we just say it to our kids just to say it? It's a reality. It's happening. And I think it's just the more people who realize that white privilege isn't 100% tied into your financial status and what you had from a financial standpoint growing up, the better. People need to realize that is really just the color of your skin has not held you back in any shape or form in your life. Now, you might have been held back because you didn't have any money and your family didn't. That's fine too, but that's not fine. But, there's people who are being held back financially and because of the color of their skin. And then there's people who have money financially and are still being held back. Modern day country clubs in all these suburbias around the country, whether it's spoken on or not spoken on, they cap the amount of Black members they can have. My sister's high school graduation, a parent brought up, they had to scramble and switch the place of their high school graduation because it was a white parent too, which is even better because white people's voices on these topics resonates more than Black people's, unfortunately. He said, you know what? We know the history of this country club. They don't admit a higher number of Black people at this country club. I don't think we should be having our high school graduation there. And the school switched it. And that's that was in 2013 when my sister graduated. So modern times, it's things like that. So you can be Black with money and still experience it. So the sooner people realize it's not all financial, I think the better it will be for everyone.
Great. It's great advisement from both of you. I appreciate that. So one other question that I have for you guys. Leaving this conversation, and you've imparted us with so many wonderful pearls of wisdom to think about, and from your perspectives, that is greatly appreciated. What's the one thing you want to leave with folks, coming out of this, and not only around white privilege, but around the mission we have around educating people around racism against African Americans and the action we can take? What's the one message you want to leave, particularly for your generation, the Gen Z generation, right behind Tim, you're right in that millennial, right at the end. Jason, you're millennial, and we've got a lot of Gen Zs that are on. So what message you want to leave for folks on kind of they can take from your leadership on this to move themselves from maybe silent to an ally, or an ally to an anti-racist from a leadership perspective? And either one of you can start.
I guess just kids or adults with young children. I kind of mentioned it before, but I stress just exposing them to people of different walks of life while they're young, because kids are sponges. They absorb everything, whether it's consciously or subconsciously. They do. And the most well-rounded, open-minded, accepting people that I've met as I've lived in Maryland, Connecticut, Louisiana, North Dakota, California, are the people who had, upbringings where they weren't living in a bubble just with the people who looked like them, sounded like them, practiced the same religion as them. So I can't stress that enough. And then it's just education too. I know me personally, I'm trying with my high school, and I would just like to see schools teach. And I just saw it's in Connecticut or New Hampshire. They just passed something where public schools will now teach like Black history and Native American history. And, I just think kids who, we grow up and we're so shielded, and everyone thinks that, America was just this, always this great place, and we're living the American dream. Now, I don't want to ruin your kid's innocence or be like to a little third grader, hey, America was a terrible place. That's not the intent, but I think kids should be more aware of the realities. And as a parent, I guess whenever you think, if your kid's school isn't teaching it, which a lot of these schools aren't, but whenever you feel like it's appropriate to kind of expose expose your kids or yourself even to just some of the harsher realities of this country and how we got to this place we are today, to give them a more real perspective of where we are and where we came from. I think that'll just be better for everyone in the future generations, because now a lot of people are just under this guise that everything was sunflower and roses from the inception of this country, and if you're in the place you're at, it's most likely your fault, and you're just you are in control of your own destiny. A lot of the falsehoods that we're taught and are just kind of beat into us, for lack of a better phrase, through our upbringing, are just simply not true. The more people who know it's not true, the better. And I think people will make better decisions and treat people better and have more empathy, knowing some of the realities of this country and how we got to this place.
It's great, Tim.
I second everything Rachel just said. That was that was a lot of good stuff. I guess for me, I think it's about the education. It's about lifting up the next generation. I think this isn't something that disappears tomorrow. It's something that we need to work on, and we have to build kind of a next generation that has has addressed racism and thinks about race and understands it in a way that I don't think any generation has before. And I'll leave you with like just a story from from being out and talking to people all summer. Is one of the most encouraging things I would say for my sister and I was the amount of young kids that would come by and just like go woo, or like, oh, like this is awesome, or a kid biking that by that's 12 that's just like, oh, it's so cool that you're out here, things like that. And that 12-year-old and that 6-year-old, they're not going to stand. Actually, we have seen young kids out and in protesting in recent months, but a lot of them aren't going to be out there right now. But the fact that they are already starting to understand, maybe not holistically what's going on, but to a little bit, and that we have parents, actually teaching them that and giving them visibility to, what is like the truth of our society is huge. And I think we need to continue to do that. We need to continue to have conversations like this everywhere, and at your dinner table and wherever it is, because that's how we create, this more equal, just world when it comes to race.
Yeah. As April always says to me, which resonates so well, when everything is said and done, it's just the right thing to do. It's just the right thing to do. So, listen, both of you, so much appreciate the great dialogue and the insights that you gave us, and your willingness to tell your personal stories and your experiences, which is uncomfortable by itself, but really, I think for me, certainly, I hope for others, it really helped educate us on the experiences you have and some of the tools that we can use in order to be allies and be anti-racist and leaders as it relates to fighting racism, as well as understanding our white privilege and addressing our white privilege. One of the things I also want to mention is do take some time to go through the chat. There's just some wonderful things here, and I really appreciate you sharing. I mean, Fennell, appreciate your view on the conversations that you had with the white friend who talked about they worked hard for everything they have and they don't have privilege, which is the classic answer that a white person gives. And as we talked about, I think Tim and Jason addressed that really well from a socioeconomic perspective. I think Emily's advisement is being comfortable with yourself, and Tim saying the same thing. Caitlin talking about white fragility, which is a really good book and an uncomfortable book for whites to read. But I think it really does give you perspective on what white privilege is and what whites have to do to help drive the changes that we want to make. A lot of great parenting advice. Jason, you admitting that your parents were right certainly came up on here. And hopefully Hank has the check in the mail for you for telling his kids to listen to their parents. Really good stuff there, but also some really good stuff. Nikki brought up the doll test video on YouTube, and I've seen that video, and I would strongly suggest that you watch it, especially if you're a parent, a young parent, and really see some of the impacts that parenting, and as Hank asked the question around the environment that people are in, influences that. So a number of other things, a number of great things from Nikki, from Lakeisha, and others. So take a moment and absorb some of that. And I appreciate your guys' feedback. And I'm going to hand it back over to April for some final comments, and we'll let you guys go.
Okay. Wow, guys, I want to thank you so much. Yeah, I knew this was going to be a very inspiring conversation, and I thank you so much. And I want to say this as deliberately as I can. And the young people will lead them. It's just, I really appreciate Tim and Jason. I appreciate your forthrightness. I appreciate your boldness. I appreciate your honesty. And, if only we can approach our lives like children, like young people. It's just, I think it's just easier just to face it. It's easier just to talk about it. It's easier just to acknowledge that that these things, these issues are real. And so I just want to thank you guys for leading us. Like Mike said, him and we're co-founders of Common Bonds, and even before Common Bonds, I try to have these same conversations with Mike. Prior to Mike, I didn't have many white friends, but I wanted to, and Mike has shown me that, that he's a white guy who, with his white privilege, believes that Black Lives Matter. And so, we both try to have honest and open and hard and sometimes emotional conversations with each other so that we can, help bridge gaps of inequality, so that we can help address these things in our societies, and not just talk about them, but be vehicles of change. Jason alluded to the fact that, sometimes his responses aren't as polished as he would want them to be. And if he's like me, it's because these micro inequities just pile up till your patience is thin. But like you said, for progress sake, we got to breathe. And that's what I tell myself: take a pregnant pause, count to 10 in your head, and address it. So, but I want to thank you guys for modeling that for us, for showing us how to be direct, how to have these conversations honestly. And that's how things change. And so I want to thank you. Now, we are continuing this conversation on white privilege on this coming Tuesday. So if you can, try to join us again this Tuesday. We have Chip Rossi from Bank of America will be one of our speakers, and Tom Horn from JP Morgan Chase. So they will continue this conversation on white privilege on Tuesday. So try to join us if you can. And again, I want to thank you guys so much for your time. Thank you for being a part of Common Bonds community. We can't do this without you. We need everybody. We need everybody speaking up. We need everybody talking about it. And more importantly, collaborating on what we can do, because we have to do something. We have to answer people. We have to change laws. We have to change policies. We have to not change people's minds, but, you know, I think Tim said we have to kind of make it real for people. Last thing, and I'm going to let you go. I'm a movie buff, and I like to relate movies to my life and the morals of the movies. A Time to Kill. I don't know if you guys have seen A Time to Kill with Samuel L. Jackson. They're in this courtroom setting, and Samuel L. Jackson is on trial for murder because these white men killed or raped his daughter. But you can tell that the jury, they're not buying it. They don't feel it. They don't understand how he could take somebody's life. So the lawyer told the jury, close your eyes. Just close your eyes.
It's Matthew McConaughey, by the way, his lawyer.
Okay, thank you. He said, just close your eyes. Just close your eyes and think about this story as I tell you. And so he went on to say that, you know, there was a little girl walking home from the store, and these two guys pulled her over, threw her in the truck, raped her, threw her over the bridge. And he went through all these horrific things, and you still can tell that the white people still didn't get it. And then he said, now imagine she was white. And then you can see that they got it. They got it. It was real. It was personal. And so I guess what we have to do is make it real. For me, it's make it real so that people know that we're not aliens, Black African Americans. We're not aliens. We're real. We have common bonds. We are common bonds. So with that, I want to say good night. I want to say to you who celebrate Hanukkah, happy Hanukkah. That's today. Happy Hanukkah. And hopefully we will see you guys again, hopefully Tuesday. And again, thank you, Tim. Thank you, Jason. Really appreciate you guys. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.